Okay. Let me see. Hope my internet connection is stable. Yeah, I think we're live. Awesome. So this is a very exciting episode. Gonna do a deep dive on ION, this mystery coin that was somehow baked into the Osmosis protocol and now might be close to be standing on its own feet. So we'll talk a lot about the IONIZE proposal that Sunny came up with, and then we have a brand new face here today. Well, actually not a face, but Jake is on the channel for the first time ever. So he will be leading the ION project from here on, I guess. So yeah, thanks, Sunny, for being back here. I think it's your fourth or fifth time. And Jake, welcome to the channel. Maybe you can start off with sharing a little bit of context on your background and your involvement in the Cosmos space or Terra space, and yeah, so that people can get to know you a little bit better.
Okay. First of all, hello everyone. My name is Jake, and many of you guys may have not know who I am, but I've been in the Cosmos space since 2019, and I'm actually 2 times winners on Cosmos Hackathon, and one was in Hackathon Seoul, and second was San Francisco DeFi Hackathon, and I was the founder of the Everett, which was a staking derivatives protocol on top of Cosmos. And we have failed to ship the Everett protocol. However, we have shipped eventually two cool products. One is Kepler Wallet, and the second is the Anchor. And so how we are involved in the Anchor was we got acquired from Terra while back in the past, and was I was working at the Terraform Labs for a year, and I left Terra and founded a company called Many Things, and yeah, and Many Things is a company or a DAO maybe that builds a cool products, and I tend to persuade people in Web2 space and to build products on top of Web3 ecosystem. So now we're building a bunch of NFT protocols to onboard people into the Web3 space, and the ION is the interesting idea. Uh, so we're involved right now and building the ION DAO governance tools as a starter.
Nice. So how do you guys know each other, Sunny and Jake? Did you met at a hackathon or been working before together, or?
I think we met at 2019 at the Osaka DeFi what the fuck event, right? Yeah.
uh, no, I think we might have been at the Seoul Hackathon. I think I was even
Oh,
before that.
right. Yeah, but we didn't have that much
Yeah.
conversation back then.
But also, one thing that's worth noting, so Jake mentioned the Everett project, which he was the founder of. But so Dojmos actually used to work on Everett before he, so when maybe I guess I think that correct me if I'm wrong. I think the history of sort of what happened was when Everett got acquired by Terraform Labs, like a portion of the team went to Terraform Labs and started to build Anchor, and then Josh and Tony decided not to join Terraform Labs and instead decided to focus on building Kepler. So that's sort of like Jake and Dojmos have been working together for like many years now.
Correct.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Crypto Twilight is saying Sunny is looking great. Yeah, as long as you still have hair, because end of February is the deadline. If Superfluid staking doesn't ship, we'll see Sunny bald. Are we in track of that on that?
It looks like it. I mean, I hope so.
I've seen people saying like, please, delay it by a week or two, just so we can see Sunny bald.
Please no.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe we can kick this off. Ion for many is a big mystery. obviously Osmosis is going absolutely viral right now. Big congrats on that, Sunny and everyone involved in that. You guys absolutely killed it. Best decks on earth, best decks under the sun. I think the second biggest now after a Uniswap. Just flipped pancakes yesterday, I think. So that's really cool. And then Ion is kind of like this mystery coin that was token that was baked into the Osmosis Genesis file in the beginning. And back in the day, we made a video about this, about how to, can claim the airdrop, because it was distributed via an airdrop, which is now over. I think December 15th was the clawback, the deadline for people to also claim their airdrops. So maybe first of all, Sunny, I think you could tackle this. What was the original idea that you had with Ion, and also the kind of like initial distribution model and airdrop criteria, just so for people to get a bit of context?
Yeah, sure. So Ion has definitely like a weird origin story. So how it started was so we were building Osmosis, and we're approaching the launch, and we need to we started running some internal test nets just to test the protocol, and it was an AMM, right? So if it's an AMM, we obviously need at least 2 tokens by which to test the AMM. And so we'd always, so in our testnet files and testnets, we'd always put in like the Osmo token, and we're like, okay, we need a second token to like test it with. So we just create a second token, and we're like, we used to call it ions, just because ions were just, we thought it was a funny name, and like it was one of the contenders for like what we were going to call the main token as well. But we decided to go with Osmo. But we're like, okay, let's just add it in here, call it ions. And we'd always, all of our testnet AMMs would always have like Osmo and ions. But then it was like 2 days before the launch of Osmosis, and just really tired at this point, fumes of sleep. And I was just chatting with a friend. We were just like up shooting the shit, and we were like, I think we were starting like putting together the mainnet Genesis file, and we're like, hey, we're looking at the testnet file and like copying stuff over. We're like, hey, we have this like Ion token here. What if we copied this over as well? Like, wouldn't that be funny? Like, and it's like, but what is this thing? We don't know. And like, we were just like, what is it going to do? We're like, we don't know. Maybe it'll be like the Unisocks of Osmosis or something like that. And like, but like, what is this thing? I don't know idea, but like, how do we distribute it? So I pulled an all-nighter, sort of like getting the distribution for Ion put together. And what we ended up doing was we ended up distributing it to a combination of, so you got 1 Ion for every governance vote that you did on the Cosmos Hub up until like Stargate. And then you got 1 Ion for every Cosmos Hub upgrade during which you were delegated to Sika. Sika was the validator that myself and Dev run. And the reason we gave it to this that distribution was, one, we like, okay, one of the things that we thought was like, hey, giving more we want to give something to like people who voted in governance, because it's like that's like something we didn't consider in the original Osmo distribution, but we were like, hey, I think voting is important, and we wanted to reward that somehow. So that's that. And then we also said like, hey, so one of the reasons that Osmosis was able to, we never had to raise any sort of VC funding or anything like that prior to launch. We were able to self-fund the entire from inception up until launch. And we were able to do that because what we did was we took like revenues from the Sika validator and used to roll them into like funding the development. So hiring developers, paying legal fees, all the stuff needed to launch a chain. And so I think Osmosis was all the better for it. That we, I think Osmosis maybe just wouldn't be what it is today if we had gone the VC route. And so the Ion distribution to Sika delegators was sort of like a thank you that it was their delegation that made it possible for us to do that. So so that's why the distribution happened, and we're like, okay, we're just gonna airdrop this like free thing as like a thank you token to the delegators and to the governance voters. And we didn't actually tell anyone what the distribution was initially. We just sort of left that a mystery, along with like what the purpose is. And what happened was the community. I think the mystery sort of like kicked it off. We're like, we didn't even announce it either. We just put it in the Genesis, and then when people were like logging into Osmosis for the first time to check their Osmo airdrop, a bunch of people were like, hey, I have this Ion thing. Like, who else has this? Do you have one? Like, and people were like, oh, we have one. Like, why do we have this? And so it was like a Telegram group that was formed around it, trying to figure out what is this thing? What is the use? Like, and so what's cool is actually over time, the community managed to like successfully reverse engineer the distribution, which was like pretty interesting. They, some very impressive sleuthing from a lot of people. So that was cool. And then, so that's fine. They're able to figure out the distribution, but now it was like, what is this for? And, that wasn't something to discover, because that was, never something that was planned. And so instead it was like, okay, we have to start thinking of ideas of what to do with it. And so, there's a lot of ideas that were floating around. People were talking about building different protocols, investment DAOs, all these like sorts of different things. And we, and I, for the most part, I kind of stayed out of it for a lot of it, where I was just like, hey, I want to let I would participate in the chats, but it's funny actually, if you go into the Ion chats, like way back in like early in like June or something, I think that the IONIZE proposal actually originally formed in like June in the chat, and it was like myself and Mike Barb and Wilby, and there was like a couple of people who were within this chat where we actually kind of came up with the proposal. But it kind of like, I was busy with other stuff, obviously with Osmosis and launch and all that kind of stuff, so we never really did anything with that. And then until like we decided like, hey, let's take that proposal and rewrite it. But we'll get to that in a bit, I guess. But yeah, so yeah, that sort of was the origin story of Osmosis. Of Ions.
Yeah, and I think with a recent, I think last week Ions went to what, $24,000. So just a single vote on governance could you like crazy amounts of money, at least in dollar terms. But yeah, that's very interesting. I think the first time we talked about Ion, I don't remember how you call it exactly, but I think part of it was also this kind of like experiment that you first build a community and then you find out the use case. Because a lot of people have always said like, oh, Ion has no use case, it's a useless coin. And even in the IONIZE proposal, it clearly says, hey, Ion started off as a meme coin, right? We never envisioned this to have like crazy, dollar value. But here we are, and the community has formed around it, obviously also with the growth and success of Osmosis. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then Jake, at what point did you get involved?
So my history is kind of weird, because like I was like kind of off from the Cosmos space, but I was keeping in touch on looking at Osmosis, because like my good friends are working on Osmosis. So I went to the Cosmoverse in
Lisbon.
It's a weird story, and yeah, Lisbon, yeah, and Misang was working at the Confio. She's my like she's attending like she's an older, same school, it has same high school, so like we have a very close relationship between. And I told Misang about like you build a very good repository, which is a Cosmwasm, but now you're not working any products and you're not getting any revenue. And I thought, let's build applications on top of Osmosis. And I went to what was his name? The CEO of Confio.
Ethan Fry.
Oh, Ethan Fry. Yeah, I I went to Ethan Fry at the vegetarian restaurant, and and said to Ethan that you should build DeFi applications on top of Osmosis. And we had a very long conversation on building applications, and we first talked about building lending protocols on top of Osmosis, and we three had a chat, and we actually wrote a proposal on building lending protocols. And Sunny told me that lending protocol is a very key item for Osmosis, so he thinks the core team should build the lending protocol, and I agreed. And so I'm also interested in building applications on Osmosis and what's the options. And he talked about the ions, and I thought they were very cool. But since we didn't have any Cosmos developer at the time, so I was seeking around who can I be able to build that product. And one of my good friend called Frost Orange, he used to work at Terra, and he now left Terra from Labs, and he joined many things, which is my DAO. And now he used to work at Terraform Labs and build Cosmwasm contracts in Terraform Labs, so he can ship it. So yeah, that's how we started to talk and discuss and develop more ideas from that start.
Nice.
Funny
Sounds
story.
like oh yeah, go ahead.
Funny story about Frost Orange as well is that it's almost actually a little bit coming full circle, because so if you actually go look on the Osmosis GitHub repo, you'll see who like the top developer is, or like the most number of commits. Until very recently, I think maybe like a couple of weeks ago, Dave actually became the most number of commits. But up until then, like Frost Orange was actually had the most number of commits because Frost Orange and Tony actually developed the MVP of Osmosis at the hackathon together.
Yeah, we should get these guys on the channel here as well. That would be awesome. But yeah, that sounds like, so Jake, sounds like you played a big role in proposal, I think 107 was it, to integrate Cosmwasm onto Osmosis, which is now in the works. So that's really cool. Yeah, so now it looks like there's a new era for Ion, from switching over from this meme coin that was airdropped to people. Then with the clawback on December 15th, 16,500 something ions, which is more than 80% of the supply, were clawed back into the Osmosis community pool. And there's now only 6,000 circulating, 6,000 ions. So the question is now, what do you do with all these funds, and what is the use case for Ion? And I think today we will figure this out, and maybe see where is the direction going for Ion from here on, right? So let's start with the IONIZE proposal, which envisions, basically my perception, that Ion becomes to Terra what Synthetics is to Maker, right? You guys also state that in the document. I think Sunny, you wrote it actually. So can you maybe, like, on a big picture, easily explain what that means? Like, also, like, just the context on synthetic assets. I think for many people that's a complete new field in crypto, right, that people don't know. So maybe just briefly explain the idea and the goal behind this proposal before we go deeper into certain items.
Yeah, sure. So one thing I just want to start off with is, just remind everyone that the IONIZE proposal it's just that, exactly that. It's a proposal, right? Like, it's still really up to the Ion community to choose what they want to do. I think some people are interested in the IONIZE proposal, and there's a lot of people who are also not interested in it. And so, the DAO would have to decide if they want to do it, and we can talk about how the DAO will decide, because that's something Jake's team is working on right now. But okay, but let's go just dive into the IONIZE proposal. So yeah, what are synthetics? Synthetics are basically saying that, hey, it's a virtual representation of an asset that exists somewhere that doesn't exist on chain, or it can exist on chain as well, but it's a virtualized representation of an asset that tracks the price of some external asset. So or some external index. But so yeah. So what can this be used for? Like, imagine you had a synthetic Bitcoin. What would that mean? That means you have a asset that's not backed by Bitcoin, but the asset's value is tracking Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin goes up, the value of this asset goes up. If Bitcoin goes down, the value of it goes down. And the key is it's not collateralized by Bitcoin itself. It could be collateralized by something else, or it could be not collateralized at all. There's different types of synthetic assets, but that's the key thing here. So you'll notice that there is actually a type of, okay. So the biggest synthetic platform today is called Synthetics with an X at the end. And Synthetics, it basically okay, let me go back for a second. These synthetic assets, you'll notice that there is actually a very popular type of synthetic asset that's used throughout the crypto ecosystem, and that is stablecoins. Stablecoins are a very specific type of synthetic asset, right? They're a USD synthetic, right? So if you look at something like DAI, right? DAI it's tracking the price of $1 of $1 US. But it's not actually backed by US dollars, right? Like USDC would not be considered a synthetic because yes, it's tracking the price of a dollar, but it's also backed by US dollars in a bank account somewhere, right? So it's not a synthetic, but DAI is a synthetic, and basically this synthetics protocol with the X. I'm going to start using the word synth instead of synthetic, just so because synthetic and synthetics. Hard to hear the difference. But yeah, so the synthetics protocol, what they realized was how Maker does their stablecoin is they came up with this concept called CDPs, where you put in ETH as collateral, over collateralize with, and then you can pull out, it's 150% over collateralized. You can pull out that much a DAI out of it. And if you want to get your ETH back, you have to give back the ETH, the DAI, and you can withdraw your ETH. And they have this whole liquidation system where if the value of the ETH goes below some amount, then you get liquidated. And this entire CDP concept that made it possible to mint synthetic USD via over collateralizing by ETH. The synthetics protocol, what they came along and said was wait, that's so cool. Why do we only have to mint synthetic dollars with that? So why can't we mint synthetic any asset, right? So what they did was, they did something interesting where they said instead of collateralizing with ETH, they made it so you collateralize with their own native token called SNX. And I was actually a little bit skeptical of the project because of that, but it turns out I'm wrong about things. Clearly they've been very successful. But yeah, so you collateralize with SNX, and then you can go mint synthetic dollars. So they have a synthetic dollar called SUSD, but you can also go mint synthetic Bitcoin. They have SBTC. You can go mint synthetic. I think they have gold. I think as well. So you can go mint SBT. Gold or whatever. You can mint all these different synthetic assets, but they all use the same CDP model that was invented by MakerDAO. Now, what's interesting that what's happened in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, is we've just seen an explosion in the number of stablecoin designs, right? So, back in 2019, when Maker and synthetics were being built, CDPs were the way to build stable coins or synthetic assets. But in stable coins in 2020 and 2021, we saw the rise of vays and ESD and Terra. And so in this history, and so what's happened is we've learned all these different ways of creating stable coins. Some of them are more successful than others. And I think what Terra did, has clearly been this runaway success, right? It is the largest. I think it's the biggest decentralized stablecoin right now in supply and everything, bigger than DAI at this point. And what they invented was this new model called the mint and burn model. where instead of using CDPs, they do this system where you can, I think we can go into the exact mechanisms in a little bit, but the basic is they have this thing where like, you can burn Luna in order to mint USD, and you can burn UST in order to mint more Luna. And so it's in a way kind of backed by Luna, but not really. And so we can talk about that. But what that did was it helped it break out of this like capital efficiency issue that CDPs have. Because with CDPs, you're capped in the amount of stablecoin or synthetic that can be minted based off of the amount of collateral that people can put up. But because Terra's mint and burn model is a little bit it's not collateralized. It's more of an uncollateralized system. It allowed the number of stablecoins to become much larger. And so our observation was just that, hey, if any stablecoin design can be generalized in order to make a generalized synth design. So if synthetics generalize the maker CDP model, someone should go and generalize the Terra mint and burn model. And that's sort of where the original idea behind this IONIZE proposal, which was just this, it's not really anything special to IONS itself. It's just this idea that like someone should go figure out how to generalize the Terra model, and maybe you can build a in the same way that the Terra has like outperformed like Maker, you can maybe have a synth protocol that like achieves just way bigger usage than synthetics ever did.
Yeah, I think to recap a little bit what you said, I think you could basically categorize stablecoins into asset-backed stablecoins on the one hand, the tethers, the USDCs, where there's also companies behind, and it's actually a dollar-backed stablecoins where you said there's dollars deposited somewhere in a bank. They, in the best case, have audit reports to have real clarity that these assets actually exist, right? And then you have the algorithmic stablecoins, which was, I think, pioneered by DAI in the first place, collateralized algorithmic stablecoins, in that case by ETH. I think DAI, in the meantime, they also accept other forms of collateral, if I'm not mistaken. And then UST brought it to another level with this mint and burn model, and that also kind of like has a positive, or at least it has some kind of like feedback loop to Luna in terms of like demand for the Luna token. So that's kind of like where we are right now. And then this IONIZE proposal tries to generalize that so that you can also issue other synthetic assets, right? You already said gold, for example, or even stocks or whatever. I saw in the paper you also said iDoge, so we can bring Dogecoin into the Cosmos ecosystem. So how would you say what would be the precise role of ION in that case? Would ION just be that kind of like native token that if you mint and burn ions, then you would create these synthetic assets? Is that how it's going to be like?
Yeah, so that's the proposal where you need, so ions would be the equivalent of Luna in the Terra model, where ions are the asset that you can burn in order to mint new iAssets, and iAssets can be burned in order to mint more ions. And ions, basically, in a way, what they're doing is sort of acting like the counterparty to all the iAsset trades, where in the same way that Luna is acting as the counterparty to all the UST, ions would be doing that for all the iAssets. And they would also, in order to do that, they would also need to like sort of accrue value from the usage of iAssets as well, right? So that's sort of where we have to involve some sorts of like minting fees and things like that, as well as like So the ion, there needs to be a way for ions to also accrue more value based off and like benefit. And then one way is just the increase in usage of iAssets also just shrinks the supply of ions, and that's like inherently like one form of like reducing the supply of ions would help. But then also just like, in Terra, they've done things where like, when you're transacting on Terra, you pay fees based off of the amount that like you're transacting. And those fees go to Luna stakers. And that's like one way of sort of like, as the economy of UST grows, it drives more value to Luna. And so there needs to be similar sort of mechanisms put into place that as the iAsset economy grows, that should drive more value to the ION holders that are sort of backstopping the system.
Yeah, so basically with an increased demand of iAssets, so say, for example, iDoge would go viral on Osmosis. And I think primarily the goal is also to have liquidity pools on Osmosis paired with Osmo for these iAssets that would obviously burn a lot of ions, which then would, given the current scarcity, I think we can talk about this later, but to make it really like sustainable in the long run, we also might have to consider changing the basics of the ion tokenomics. But I just wanted to get back real quick and ask you whether you guys, or Jake or Sunny, if you see any weak point in the current system of UST, or do you just think, hey, that's a perfect system, it's just limited for that one use case of minting and burning UST? Or is there more weak points that you detect?
Jake, you want to take this first?
Can I skip this question?
Sure, I can go for it then.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I think that I think Terra actually has. I think it is one of the most radical stablecoin designs that have been built. Right, like I think it is definitely a very risky design compared to these over collateralized designs, right? Like something like DAI, you know that there's ETH that's over collateralizing the value of the outstanding DAI. In something like Terra, that's just not the case, right? That all the UST is backstopped by it's not collateralized by Luna itself. It's collateralized by market demand for Luna, which is a weird concept, right? Where it's like, because there's not Luna that's sitting there that you can convert your UST into. It's Luna, when you burn UST, it increases the supply of Luna, but you're betting that there's market demand that will absorb that supply shock of Luna, and that will maintain the Luna, the Luna price, which is what backs UST. This is definitely more risky than over collateralized stablecoins, but like I mentioned, it allows it way more capital efficiency and can scale just way bigger, right? Like you're not. So I mean, why do people collateralize in MakerDAO? Is because they're trying to like get some leverage or something like that, right? But like and so your supply of DAI is really just capped on like the demand for leverage on ETH. They've started to improve it by like adding other collateral, but what you'll notice, what ends up happening is when demand for leverage on ETH goes down, all the collateral of DAI becomes like basically USDC, because that's the only, when the market is bearish, no one wants leverage on crypto assets. So instead, what they'll do is they'll just deposit USDC as collateral instead. And so that's like, it becomes sort of a non-decentralized stablecoin when there's not enough demand for leverage. Terra doesn't have that limitation. It can, in theory, scale infinitely, but it's also very, it's what I'd call very reflexive, right? When Luna is doing very well, it does very well, right? But when Luna starts to crash, it because it's not collateralized, it could potentially start a market panic. And we kind of saw that happen for a brief minute in May of this year when the market did the Elon crash, and UST actually had dipped down to about 85 cents or something like that, but only for a couple of minutes. And the peg actually had recovered, and that's because the market had enough belief that the peg would recover, and so the peg did recover. And there's also probably market participants who really strongly believed that the peg would recover and went in and bought up and like recovered and helped by believing the peg would recover and arbitraging that did help the peg recover. And so anyways, that was a long-winded way of saying it is a risky stablecoin design, but a one that has the potential to scale to like great lengths. The example, actually, the analogy I like to give is I think Terra is the closest thing I've seen to digital fiat currency. And fiat currency has two end states, right? It either explodes, like blows up and ends up like just breaking down, or it just if it can keep its growth cycle going, you become the size of the US dollar, right? It's like those are sort of the end states of fiat currency. And so I think that the ION idea was like saying, hey, let's take this radical design of the Terra model and let's make it even more radical by like generalizing it. And so that's why we think that the ION system is so very like it's very experimental and risky. And that's why it was like that's kind of why we proposed doing it with ions as well, where like rather than something where like, oh, people raise money and like, here's this experimental token that literally started as an experiment. Why not test this radical tokenomics design with it?
And I think also one big, or Jake, you want to say something?
Oh yeah, adding a little bit comment. So when I was in Terraform Labs, like the main objective for Terra is to export the USD stablecoin into the whole ecosystem of blockchains. So like if there's a layer 1 protocol, if they don't have a stablecoin yet, they provide the Terraform Labs or Terra ecosystem provides UST infrastructure. So the stablecoin acts as an infrastructure layer. And when we think on this IAM proposal, I personally think that for assets like iAssets can be exported into a Cosmos ecosystem. So basically, for example, like iGold can be used into like other different ecosystems in Cosmos blockchains. So if the demand of the whole iAsset increases in overall Cosmos SDK ecosystem, then the supply of the ion can even be more rare. So the objective of this proposal is that how we can actually export the iAssets into overall blockchain ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one big factor to like maintain the peg for especially a whole marketplace of synthetic assets is price oracles, right? CryptoRig is already on top of the game here. So I think in the proposal you guys mentioned band protocol, which is also then IBC enabled. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of price oracles to maintain a peg of synthetic assets, and also like how it works very briefly, not going into technical depth, but just very briefly how that works and why it's important.
Jake, you want to take this one?
Okay. So if it's not asking about the technical part, like what is actually asking, like how it works or like the importance of the oracle?
Yeah, just like how, I mean, if you want to explain also in technical terms, try to like keep it easy. But yeah, just like the importance of price oracles and price feeds for synthetic asset marketplaces.
So basically, for synthetic protocol, like in order to bring actual like Ethereum on top of Cosmos SDK ecosystem, and there's a gravity bridge, you can like directly like get Ethereum on top of the Cosmos SDK ecosystem, but what you can actually do is using the synthetic protocol, like using like a third-party oracle, which is like for example like band protocol or Chainlink. So basically, if you burn and mint ions, like using the oracles, and if, for example, like if the price of the ions are 50K and the Bitcoin price is 50K, and you burn one ion and mint one IBTC. So the importance of oracle is that it has to maintain the liveness. So yeah, I had a very brief conversation with Sunny about the oracle part, and I personally think using the oracle via IBC is kind of risky because currently the I do trust the IBC protocol, but it's a different part where you keep liveness, and if the liveness breaks, then the ion supply directly affects. So the important part of the whole synthetic protocol for ion is that make sure that the oracle does work in any circumstances. Yep.
Sunny,
Anything to add?
any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically right. Where it's like, you need to have like an oracle that basically the minting and burning of like when you want to convert ions to the iAssets, you need an oracle price of the asset that's being tracked by iAssets, right? And that's what allows you to convert ions to other iAssets at that specific price, right? And so there's different options for where we can get the oracle prices from. So one, like we mentioned in the proposal, was the band protocol over IBC. So they export oracle prices over IBC. The other is, we can integrate with something on chain where like, band protocol or Chainlink or someone could like put, send transactions on chain to update oracles. And then there's a third option as well, where we could do actually what Terra does, where Terra actually has their validators submit price oracles for the Luna price on different external markets. And so we could also have the Osmosis validators also submit price oracle data for like the different assets that want to be tracked. So, there's different options for where we can do the oracle. I think, obviously what we can always do is start with something simple and secure, and then like, evolve it over time.
So how do you guys envision the future of like how ION is going to be designed, right? Right now it's just a token on Osmosis, but there's a proposal around building a DAO, like turning the ION community into an actual DAO. We can talk about this more in depth in a second, but just from a basic architectural standpoint, do you think ION should, I mean, obviously with CosmWasm coming, I think the answer would be to have ION as a set of smart contracts on top of Osmosis, or do you think eventually at one point ION could also be on its own chain?
Yeah, I think that go ahead, Jake.
Okay. Yeah, so mentioning about the being an own chain, so I personally think that envisioning as building on top of ION not just imply building the app on Osmosis, but I think the whole application narrative on Cosmos SDK should build on top of Osmosis in the first place and derive outside from the Osmosis eventually to being a independent chain. So to answer the question, yes, I personally think if the ION ecosystem can be independent chain. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Sunny, any thoughts on that or?
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's
Okay.
right. Where I think the CosmWasm, we're adding CosmWasm to Osmosis, right? And I think ions will start off by being their own, like a contract on Osmosis and have governance there. And I think that, the flow that we want to encourage, in fact, within the Cosmos ecosystem, and like, is that, we want to make it easy for people to launch new products, have them, if you want to just write a smart contract, deploy it on Osmosis, and just like get product market fit there, have easy access to the DEX. And then once you hit a sort of certain scale, then you can go split off onto your own chain at that point. And kind of like Osmosis acts as this like sort of incubator for new products as well. So I think that's like a user flow that we'd like to sort of promote. And yeah.
Awesome. One big thing to, I think that's more of a game theoretic item, is how to create demand for iAssets, right? And in the blog post, I think there's two main things. The first one is being, obviously you can, offer, if the ION community wants to, they can offer ION incentives for iAsset liquidity pools on Osmosis. And then another one, which is really exciting, is this ionic bond idea, which I think was inspired by the Olympus DAO model, where you can basically sell bonds at a discount. So maybe can you talk us through about some of the ideas and what's the game plan here?
I think Sunny should answer, because it's like related to the Cosmos proposal that Sunny's writing.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit, I guess. But so yeah, I think like, these ION incentives and stuff, I think that the real demand for iAssets comes from, people wanting exposure to those assets, right? Like, the incentives are there as a enablement for people to get, like, we need to build up liquidity for iAssets so that people can, have them. But like, none of this is useful, and there's no point of building up liquidity and giving incentives for this if like there's not actual real organic demand for these assets, right? And that's why, we have to be, we have to think about what kind of assets do we want, what kind of iAssets do we want. We want to make things that are, things that people don't have access to anywhere else in the crypto sphere, and like give them access to it here, right? Like within Cosmos, we don't have access to Bitcoin yet, right? But I'm sure a lot of people would like to have some Bitcoin sitting in their Kepler wallet, right? And so they can use it within Osmosis and Cosmos ecosystem. And so having some sort of IBTC synthetic Bitcoin allows them to get an asset that mirrors the property of Bitcoin. Or Jake was talking, or you can even talk about things that like can't exist on blockchains at all. Like there's like gold, for example, is like an asset that like, there's literally no way of putting gold on the blockchain. So the best we can do really is synthetic assets, right? Or you can have like, trusted pegs where like companies hold gold, but like, a synthetic is a way of doing that in a more trustless way. And then, you can also create like iAssets out of things that aren't really even assets themselves, like out of indices. So, Jake was talking earlier about like VIX, right? VIX is this like volatility index and people maybe want to actually trade volatility, right? And so you could create a asset that represent, as long as there's a way to convert that feed into a price oracle, you can create iAssets based off of VIX, for example, right? And so it's like, these are like sort of things where by creating new assets that people don't already have access to, and that, serving that demand is sort of where the demand for iAssets would come. I know Jake also had some ideas around like, building interesting apps and like, just UIs that make it very easy and pleasurable for people to like use these iAssets as just trading tools. Now the things that we talked about with like the incentives and ionic bonds in order to make iAssets usable in such a way, we need to actually build up the liquidity for iAssets, right? And so that was just a proposal for how to do that. There's, one, we could just go out and give ION incentives for people to like provide liquidity in like iAsset pools. That's like a simple thing we could do. Another interesting idea was like based off of the Olympus DAO model. I think the Olympus DAO system has a lot of flaws, but I think they had this one interesting idea, which was these bonds, where it's just a way for the DAO to buy liquidity shares. And so what they would do is they'd give out bonds give out ions in exchange for liquidity shares. And so it's basically the pool builds up a portfolio of liquidity shares. And if what happens is that if the pool builds up a portfolio of iAsset Osmo liquidity shares, this one, it acts as a revenue source for the pool, because as iAssets, so like I said, we want to make sure that as iAssets are used, their usage drives value to ION. So what's nice is that as the iAssets, if it owns liquidity shares, it's getting revenue from the trading of iAssets because it's earning those trading fees. As well as it also acts as a hedge for the pool, because what happens is that if iAssets perform very well, it increases the potential supply of ions, right? But by owning liquidity shares, as iAssets perform, that actually means, at least then the ION DAO is getting, is exposed to the performance of iAssets, because as the iAssets perform in value, the liquidity shares also gain in value. Obviously not as much as the iAssets because it's a liquidity share, not the asset itself, but it's cool because this means that it's also earning more Osmo over time, because as the iAssets are performing, it's getting that means those liquidity shares have more Osmo in them, and that's Osmo that is like protocol controlled value of the ION DAO. So that's sort of like the reason why this is sort of the reason why I think the ionic bond system is interesting. Once again, this is all just like one thing I want, I really do want to stress to like the entire community is like this IONIZE proposal is like not a final thing, right? This is just like, hey, this is an idea that has been sitting in my head for too long, and I just needed to, write it out on paper so other people can like maybe explain to me why this is a terrible, dumb idea. And I think there's been a lot of people who've actually given some like good criticism on it that needs to be considered. And so, yeah, same with the ionic bonds thing, right? Maybe there's something that's like, this is a terrible idea. It was actually sort of a last minute addition to the proposal. Where we're like, hey, maybe this could also be done. Let's just throw it in there and see what people think.
Mm-hmm. Would it technically be possible to also allow, for example, the Osmosis chain to accept iAssets as collateral to secure the chain?
It could accept the liquidity shares of Osmo iAssets, because those can be used as for superfluid staking. But I don't think the Osmosis chain would allow anything other than Osmo to be used to secure it.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can talk a little bit about the DAO. So proposal 120 on the Osmosis governance was passed, which is basically a signaling proposal to implement the ION DAO treasury, which currently doesn't exist. But with the proposal passing, I think the clawed-back ions, 16,572 ions, will be transferred to this new ION DAO. So can you talk a little bit about the goals and ideas behind it, and also what measures the community can maybe take to I don't know, get involved or stay up to date with all these things?
Yeah, sure. Maybe it's worth talking about the history of the clawback itself, because I think that's like sort of important. Where, the clawback was originally in Osmosis since Genesis, and the idea was that we're going to claw back all, so to get your Osmo airdrop, you had to like do those 4 challenges, and that got you 80%. But 20% of the Osmo was just in people's accounts just to begin with. And that was done mostly just because we wanted, before we realized that we were going to do 0 fees, we're like, oh, how are people going to do those challenges if they don't have any Osmo to do those challenges with? So that's kind of why it was there. So, in that process of while people were like doing the ION, figuring out a use case, one of the roadblocks that kept getting run into was it's like, we need to have most things need to have incentives of some sort. Any protocol that gets built needs to have incentives. And one way is like doing inflation to do incentives, but that dilutes current holders. And we someone noticed that like, hey, a lot of ions were not being claimed in the airdrop. Surprisingly, a lot of Osmo obviously didn't get claimed in the airdrop either, but like a higher percentage of ions were going or not unclaimed because there was no claim process, but they were just sitting in accounts that had never made a transaction since Genesis. And so the ION community sort of came together and wrote a proposal. I want to say 32, but I don't remember the number exactly. But that was basically expanding the scope of the original clawback. So in the original version of the clawback, all the Osmo, 80% of the Osmo was going to get clawed back. And the idea was here, they said, and put into the Osmosis community pool, the idea was said, hey, let's make the ION clawback follow the same rule. Ions also follow the same rule. Like 6 months after launch, let's claw back all the ions as well and put those into a community pool as well. And so that way the ion whatever protocol we come up with to do with ions, we can make use of those clawed back ions to do it. On top of that, as part of that proposal, they also did something to help Osmo holders as well, which was they also clawed back the remaining 20% of Osmo in people's accounts, and that was sort of done as like a way to incentivize Osmo holders to be on board with this as well, because like Ion would benefit by like being a having tokens to do its protocol with, but that Osmo holders also get more Osmo clawed back into their community pool and enrich the Osmosis community pool. So then what happened? I guess maybe a little bit of an oversight, but like there was never actually any provision at that point that like of what to do with the ions for the clawback. I think the general sentiment was always that like, hey, this would be used to like the creation of some sort of protocol with ions, but it was never actually explicitly written. And I actually didn't notice that it wasn't explicitly written until like recently. And so after the clawback was done, I was like, oh, wait, we never actually explicitly said that these ions were going to be used for something related to a new protocol built with ions. We don't know what that protocol will be yet, but like, we should probably go ahead and earmark these ions, say that like, these are for some ion proposal. And so that's where we said like, hey, let's just make a proposal, get into the Osmosis community pool to like signal that like, yes, whenever there's a protocol that's ready for ions to do something with, those ions will be transported to a governance system of the new protocol. And so that's sort of where Jake's team stepped in, where they were like, they were kind of like following along from the sidelines a little bit. And then, there was we need some sort of governance system for ions. They can't use like the on-chain governance because that's like, only for the staking token. But like, so, and also obviously the timing worked well with the CosmWasm stuff happening as well. And so it's like, okay, let's go build a contract where ion holders can like deposit tokens and vote, and we can transfer ownership of all the clawback ions into this DAO that's like basically a governance system for ion holders, and then they can vote what to do with this. And I think there was some like definitely a lot of one of the big contentions was people thought that like, hey, some ions should be like kept in the community pool or should be used for like an airdrop to Osmo holders. And I completely agree. I think that is the right thing to do. Oh, Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, and I think that's also where then Jake and his team comes in. So Jake, can you maybe share some of the thoughts that you have moving forward now that the proposal has passed? What you and your team have in the works?
Yeah, so yeah, I definitely thought that ION should have a separate governance structure, and I thought it was gonna be very easy in the first place, because like since our team previously worked at Terra, and they have multiple applications using Cosmosm, so like I thought like we just simply have to do the version upgrade of the Cosmosm smart contract, and the one thing that I ask you to Sunny is that the unique structure of the Osmosis ecosystem is that like you envision it that the ecosystem of the Osmosis like doesn't use the CW20 framework, and like since the ion itself is a core assets, and it's not that tricky to develop, but it's a very I think it's a more of like a philosophical reason behind why you envision to not to bring in the CW20 assets. So like, can I ask why you use Ion as core assets?
Well, I mean, ION was a core asset just because it didn't exist. CW20 never existed when ION's first built. But in my general view of why I'm not a fan of CW20 is that I think multiple asset standards is more work for integrators, where like Ethereum has to deal with this as well, right? They have like ETH, and then they have ERC20s. And I think that is a mistake. I think I had some of my close friends at Open. They suffered a hack like a year ago because they had like two code paths in their smart contract, one that was for ETH and one that was for ERC20s, and they didn't realize that there's something works a little bit differently on ERC20s than on ETH, and like that caused them to lose like a lot of money. And wallets have to deal with it, and block explorers, and even our AMM, right? Our AMMs are designed to deal with native coins, and we'd have to go update it to deal with Cosmosm tokens. And Solana actually got rid of this, right? They said no. There's no separate token standard for new tokens on Solana. They all use the same native format as Sol does, and I think that's like the right approach. I think that ease that integration for people and like not have to deal with these multiple token standards is just going to save everyone a lot of headaches down the road. And another big thing is also, eventually on Osmosis, we want to change how assets work, right? Currently, we use like the native normal assets of the Cosmos SDK. But one of the things we wanted to always do in Osmosis from the beginning was like delve into more like privacy features down the road, right? Starting with the front running resistance, or like later down the road, we want to put like a Zcash style shielded pool for all the assets on Osmosis. And to do that, we need to switch everything to using a UTXO and all that stuff. But we can do that more easily if everything's using like the native standard, because we just change how the native standard works. But if things are existing in these contracts, it's very hard for us to go and change how that have them use our shielded pools. So that's sort of the main reason why we're like kind of anti CW20.
Yeah, and privacy is a good keyword, because I also wanted to ask you as we wrap up the ION topic, and then Sunny has an interesting proposal that he just told me about before we went live about Atom tokenomics. So that's going to be breaking news today. But I wanted to ask, so there's already a couple of like synthetic assets that are being built in the Cosmos ecosystem right now. You also had an exchange with Carter from the secret team, right? They're building Silk, which is also a very, very interesting model. Then we have the Comdex team as part of the broader persistence ecosystem. They're also building a synthetic asset marketplace. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how ION would fit into this, or IONIZE as the protocol, into this competitive landscape of synthetic asset marketplaces on Cosmos?
Yeah, sure. So there's so I think another one as well is Mirror. So Mirror and Comdex both are sort of using the CDP model of synthetics. So Mirror, what they did was they said, hey, you can use UST as collateral, as well as you can use a couple other things. You can also use Luna and Mirror tokens as well, but it's primarily, like most of it, it's all UST as collateral to mint their M assets. And Comdex does something similar. You can go use atoms and Comdex tokens and all different things as collateral in order to mint their token. And I think, once again, I think there's this big trade-off curve here between like safety and the unknown potential, right? And I think the CDP model is this very tried and true model for both stablecoins and synths. And I think having something like Comdex, which is this much more safe model for synths, is like an important to have in the ecosystem. But I think that IONs are taking this more like the radical approach of like, hey, let's try the Terra and Urich model for synths. It much riskier, but also it's this big unknown that maybe it'll become this huge thing. We don't know. The shade thing is actually interesting. So I actually did not. So I think the shade protocol people were slightly annoyed. But I don't know if it was really annoyed or just pretending. But like they're like, oh, technically we came up with this idea first, and I'm like, okay, fine, cool. But, like I said, you can go back to the chats. We had come up with the idea back in June. So, but I think one big difference between what we were doing versus the Shade folks is the Shade folks, they also wanted to do the mint burn model for synths, but they actually wanted to have a unique stabilizer asset for every synth, right? So you had like, let's say you have, so if Luna is the stabilizer asset for UST. So in their system, they'd say like, okay, Shade is the stabilizer asset for the Silk's USD stablecoin. But then, let's say you have a Bitcoin synth, you'd have another stabilizer asset for that. And then you have a gold synth, you'd have another stabilizer asset for that. And it's like, you kind of actually, and you end up building these like all these different stabilizer assets, and you don't really, I don't know, it's gonna be hard to get enough liquidity on all these stabilizer assets individually, right? It's a little bit safer because like, if you're holding the stabilizer asset for one asset, you're not exposed to the risk of another one. But I treat this almost as like the difference between Compound versus Rari. So if people are familiar with a Compound, what they do is they have one big money market, and like you can use any collateral to borrow any other collateral, any other asset in the system, and it's all in this like one unified pool. While Rari builds unique separate pools where you can say, hey, okay, this, you have in Rari you have a you have a USD DAI pool. You can use USD ETH pool. You can use ETH to borrow USD. You can use USD to borrow ETH, and it's like only siloed to this like asset. You can't use this pool's like ETH collateral, ETH liquidity. You can't use like Bitcoin to like WBTC as collateral to borrow that ETH. And it's like it silos the risk of each one, but it also just makes a generally less capital efficient market. And so, but because the risk is siloed, it actually makes it a little bit more permissionless. And I think there's benefits to both models. I think that the ones where it's tried to be more unified, they end up getting more liquidity. And that's, I think, sort of, liquidity is the name of the game on like everything, right? And I think that being able to have one stabilizer asset that builds up liquidity. One interesting thing is I think that the shade model actually becomes more like a perp system. And the stabilizer asset kind of acts like a short position on all the long positions, while ions ion in ionize, the ions act as like this like stabilizer asset for the entire thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference. Maybe there's probably room for both of them. And like I said, I keep bringing this up again and again, but like, if we're talking about like protocol riskiness, ion is like very high risk. IONIZE is a very high risk protocol, and it's like, we kind of know that and accept that, where it's like, hey, this is a really radical design that like maybe it's amazing, but like most likely maybe it just blows up. So
interesting. Yeah, I'm equally excited for both Shade and IONIZE. I think we can wrap it up here. Jake or Sunny, is there anything that you want to add or share with the community before we then talk about the Atom idea?
Not for me.
Okay. All right. So Sunny, what, I mean, I don't know anything. You just told me like, hey, I have this idea, and like, adding value to or changing or adjusting the Atom tokenomics. So what is your proposal that's coming up?
Okay, so this is gonna sound really silly, but I think the best things start off as memes, right? Where if you remember a couple weeks ago, there was like all this like thing like, oh, it's gonna be the Olympus fork of Cosmos, right? And actually now there's a couple of people building things. There's NovaDAO, there's one called Leica, which I'm super excited for, coming up soon. There's actually people building Olympus forks now, but there was that like 1 week where like half my Twitter feed was all just speculating of like, oh, is this going to be is Ion going to be the Olympus fork? Is this going to be the Olympus fork? And as a joke, I just tweeted, what if Atom becomes the Olympus fork for Cosmos? And like, and I'm like, oh, what if we rebrand Atom to Atom? Just, as a joke, and complete joke. And then we started thinking about it more, like me and Dev and like Unity and some other folks. And we're like, wait, this is not a bad idea. This is actually, this is actually a good idea. And hear me out. Here's why. Okay, what does Olympus do? Olympus, what it did was it owns this. It's trying to buy. It's using its bond system to buy liquidity of of itself, right? So it's primarily buying the liquidity of the ETH-OHM pair. And it wants to own the protocol, own liquidity of itself, so it can support its own peg, right? That's interesting, I mean, calling that like safe protocol owned liquidity is actually a little bit weird, especially because, if OHM crashes, the LP shares also crash. And so that's definitely an issue. But like, okay, let's think, what if Atom wanted to do this? What would it buy its LP shares against? OHM was buying it against ETH because ETH is like the money of Ethereum. But Atom is like, I think the model actually changes when you're the big daddy asset, right? Like, what is Atom supposed to buy its liquidity against? Instead of, it can buy some against Osmo, but like, what else would it buy liquidity against? So what if instead of just buying its liquidity, owning its liquidity against other stuff, what if you reframe it so it's owning the other protocols' liquidities against itself, right? And so what we'd want is Atom the Cosmos Hub community pool should own a portfolio of liquidity shares of Atom, like Regen Atom, Osmo Atom, AKT Atom, it should own all these like liquidity shares of all the different Cosmos ecosystem assets. And then how do you decide which ones to do? Well, if anyone's familiar with the whole like curve wars going on and like the V token model that everyone's excited about, I mean, I think that actually applies really well here, because what does the Cosmos Hub what do Atoms have right now is this like $10 billion market cap. It is this economic might, And what if you could monetize the governance power over that economic might, right? So what happened is a new token that launches on Cosmos, or the community of that token, they would want to buy and stake atoms so they can get the Cosmos hub to own the liquidity shares of its token. So that becomes a new way of getting liquidity for your token, is you get the Cosmos hub to provide to buy up that liquidity. And so people will, buy atoms so they can get the hub to buy the liquidity of their favorite tokens. And what's cool here is that that's one benefit, but the other benefit here is atoms become this like portfolio of Cosmos ecosystem assets, and that's what atoms need, right? We need a way to show that atoms are this plausible bet on the growth of the Cosmos ecosystem as a whole. That's what they need to do. And so by being this protocol that builds up a portfolio of the entire Cosmos ecosystem assets, now atoms suddenly become like, yeah, okay, how do I expose myself to Cosmos as a whole? Well, the atoms are a portfolio bet on that, right? So let me just buy some atoms. And also it helps atoms maintain its position as the base money of the Cosmos ecosystem, because it helps, as you know, I've been on this podcast before, and I keep like railing this idea that atoms need to be the base money. And so by having the Cosmos hub own all this liquidity of atoms paired with all the assets, it helps enforce the notion that atoms need to be this like base pair for the ecosystem. So I don't know. It's just like, this thing that started as a meme, and we just thought about it. But like, this just makes so much sense. And so we actually, we shared this with the, Cosmos Hub core development teams, and I think they are, pretty excited about it. So Zaki is actually writing up a proposal for writing up a proper spec for this, and like the ICF folks are actually like, sort of trying to find the resourcing to build this right now. And so, we'll I don't know if they're going to go for it, but this is once again just another idea that I had, and I think it'll be interesting if
that's a very cool idea. That's a very cool idea, and I appreciate you also coming on here and sharing that here. So I guess once the proposal comes up, there we can refer people to this video here so that they understand it. Because I remember like back in the day with the proposal, what was it, 54? That just came on the Cosmos Hub, and people were like, what is this? What is Osmosis? Why should we give away some atoms? So I think this helps to like clear the air before, it gets out there in the wild and then people react to it. And also everyone who's watching now, there's 120 people. After this stream, I strongly recommend to watch yesterday's video I made where Dev was also on, who is one of the co-founders of Osmosis. And he shared a lot of great ideas along with Zaki and Jack on the Cosmos Hub being this kind of like holding company within the broader Cosmos ecosystem without having to enforce dependencies and forcing the hub to be decentralized role. So watch that as well. And I think you made a tweet about this 3 years ago, and I think you just retweeted it to rebrand the hub. Is that something that you think should happen?
I mean, I think it's the right thing to do. Is that the thing for, I think atoms benefit a lot from the name collision. I mean, people think Cosmos, they think atoms. I think the honest thing to do is to rebrand it. But, if you benefit from the confusion, then, it's probably not in the incentive of atom holders to rebrand it. I mean, one thing I would definitely like to see is at least like on CoinGecko and stuff to like, it says Cosmos Atom. I'd like that to at least switch to like Cosmos Hub, right? Because I think that's something that just confuses people massively, and I think that like that's something that needs to be fixed.
Awesome. I think it was an incredibly productive session here, almost 1 hour and 20 minutes, and we had consistently over 120 people here. So really appreciate you guys coming on. Thanks, Jake, for being here. And looking forward to track everything that comes up with ION and the IONIZE protocol. So yeah, I think we can wrap it up here, unless there's anything else from your side you want to close with.
Yeah, just one thing. Like we're gonna ship the ION DAO governance framework tool until January. So keep in touch, and I hope the first vote would be incentivizing or giving a small grant for us for building the DAO.
Awesome, yeah. So still this month, in the next 10 days, basically.
Yes, we're building building it right now.
So ION holders, you heard it here first. Get ready, get your IONs ready, and vote on the proposal once it's up. Yeah, thanks again for coming on. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Share this with your friends, with all the ION and Osmo and Atom holders out there. And yeah, looking forward to doing this another time once the IONIZE protocol bridged over Bitcoin and Dogecoin and Tesla stock and whatever into the Cosmos ecosystem. So yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thanks.
guys.